I would just offer encouragement for local media organizations. We kind of have everything going for us except momentum. We have an interested audience. We have new tools for reaching people. We can operate in quicker ways. So just start walking with that swagger again. Figure out what you're doing better than everybody else, and don't be afraid to promote it and serve your community.
This is Small Press Big Ideas, a podcast about the business of local news in the United States. I'm your host, Paul Galortz. Small Press Big Ideas is about the opportunities and challenges that local news publishers are facing for their businesses. I'll sit down and talk with journalists, entrepreneurs, nonprofit leaders, and more in the local news industry to find out what's working, what isn't, and how the local news ecosystem can innovate and flourish in the 21st century. All right, today on the podcast, I am joined by Kyle Rickhoff and Bob Rose from AlignSimple. Kyle is the owner of AlignSimple. It's a fractional service and strategy company dedicated to driving the success of small to medium local media publishers and broadcasters. He motivates and aligns virtual teams with experience in managing over 80 resources since 2015, and his experience goes further back than that as well, which I'm sure we can get into. And Bob Rose is the digital director over at AlignSimple. Bob is a veteran journalist with experience across all forms of content and across all types of platforms, most recently at the St. Louis Dispatch, where he was responsible for exploring, editing, and creating new forms of coverage to build a loyal audience and increase digital subscription revenue. So, gentlemen, thank you for joining me. I appreciate you both being here today.
Thanks, Bob.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really great little bio you guys each sent me. I was wondering if you could maybe each take a turn and give us a quick bio in your own words of kind of your life and kind of what brought you here. Whoever wants to go first, whoever wants to chime in first.
Well, yeah, Paul, thanks.
Yeah,
I've been in the news organizations for over 40 years. And actually, I told a story. My dad had a newspaper route, so I actually remember delivering the papers when the men landed on the moon. So
wow,
pretty far back there. But yeah, in Gannett, started in sports organization, sports sections, sports editor in Knoxville and in their suburban New York. And then in St. Louis, just all kinds of different roles, overseeing design, editing, photo eventually, through all of the big news stories from Mark McGuire through Ferguson, just learning a lot about innovative ways to tell stories and really serving the community. So my passion really is there on the news side, helping them thrive, helping them serve their communities and preserve democracy. All that pretty important stuff, huh?
Yeah, definitely. That's awesome. How about you, Kyle? What would you say about your kind of background and everything?
I started in television commercial production, but then in high school, I started working the newscast, which included field photography, studio operations, and I was working on the morning show here. So I had to be at work before 4 a.m. and then went to high school after that. So I stuck with broadcast and was part of the initial team launching all the CBS affiliates in the state on a website that had more than the weather camera and a Java click-through of tour of the studio. I moved over to publishing at that point with the Billings Gazette as the digital editor and worked my career through the publicly traded company Lee Enterprises, ultimately providing digital strategy and kind of coordinating ad hoc teams to launch website redesigns, traffic initiatives that coordinated ad impressions with newsroom production, and then the initial launch of the paywall system, which for the company was a beta out of Montana. So I launched those efforts and then moved on over here to launch AlignSimple.
Some robust experiences between the two of you guys, that's why I thought you'd be great guests on here, since this show is about, local media innovation and sustainability and everything. I'm sure you have a lot of knowledge to share. So AlignSimple, you advertise a lot of fractionalized services, which I'm a big fan of just in general in kind of the business world. I actually have through my existing podcast agency, I have a package called the Fractional Podcast Producer, where it's like you hire our agency instead of like bringing on a full-time person to do it. So I love the value, but what would you say, and I don't know who wants to take this one, but how would you define for the local media publisher audience listening what fractional services are, or fractionalized services are, for someone who's only kind of heard the term in passing, or hasn't dove into it too deep?
Sure. It's definitely something that gives a lot of the publisher and owners that we talk to a little pause and some additional questions. They might be familiar with like a fractional CMO, where they have a C-level type position. They're just simply not on staff with those comp packages. They might be familiar with HR or IT departments, where it is a outside service on an ongoing retainer. And we're kind of bringing that to digital development, digital strategy, where it's not a one launch consultant. You're launching Salesforce, you need somebody to come in and out. We're looking for a long-term relationship with our publishers and really helping those people, where you might have one or two digital directors for your company that has 15 mastheads, 5 stations, and they're just trying to keep up with the trains running. So we provide what we call fractional services, which is we're part of your staff. So you'll work with me, Bob, or another one of our digital directors. And then as your needs change, you can have an SEO expert for a month to launch a project, includes technical and training. And then as we're waiting for those results, we can talk about how newsletter strategy for broadcasters or publishers can lead to additional revenue opportunities, or how it impacts first-party data. So it just allows us to bring in experts as they go, because they just can't retain those on staff as full-time positions.
Yeah, that's great. So I would imagine your services you offer, I imagine it just like almost like a pick and choose your own adventure type deal of what you need. And I'm guessing also your your expertise comes in is like, you've seen this before with these different organizations, so you can recommend, like you were just saying, like, oh, I think you could really benefit from this newsletter strategy, or what may be it. I'm sure AI has been a thing that comes up on every podcast lately. I'm sure people have questions about that.
Yeah, we do a 6-month digital alignment. So we sit down, kind of what are the projects, but as the year evolves and their strategies need to pivot, we have a resource for that. It is a bit of a pick and choose, which is sometimes difficult for folks, as they're like, well, we brush as the digital people, but you do website redesign.
Right.
But Bob goes through and he kind of maintains that relationships and identifies needs and where we need to bring in an expert. Bob, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, a lot of times, one of the things I do with several of the clients is sort of an ongoing data review each month. And because, looking at the dashboards, they don't tell any stories at all, right? It's like, driving your car, you're not driving by looking at the implements, you're not driving by looking at the gas gauge. It's sort of the checkup. But one of the things we want to do is sort of add some flavor to those, make recommendations. We had one publisher who sort of like literally hit his head and said, like, this is what I've been looking for the whole time. He's got an editor background, so he is always questioning every data point. But, we were able to get him to actionable data. The other thing is this notion that you can't be a prophet in your own country. So a lot of times we'll get with editors and it's their gut instinct, but we sort of validate what they really want to do or help accelerate the capacity of the newsroom. And I got to say, it's really enjoyable to see some of the clients accelerate more than others, and to see the ones that really embrace the changes and want to take risks and can do fast experiments. They're the ones that have the best results.
That's great. I like the you can't be a prophet in your own country. The term I've heard a lot and I've been using, I stole it from somebody, I don't know who, is it's really hard to read the label from inside the jar kind of deal. It's kind of how I look at it. Yeah,
It's better.
You need like that kind of outside general contractor type thing to come in and make these and you see other organizations.
Yeah, it's just an example of that. We had somebody, and we were talking about scroll depth, or how many people are getting to the bottom of their articles. And some of the articles were getting 30 and 40% scroll. And I look at that as glass more than half full, at least. And he goes, oh, wow, you mean only 30% of the people are scrolling all the way to the bottom? And I had to tell them, I was like, sorry, because he was an old newspaper person. I was like, we ever measured how many people followed your stories on the jumps, you would be disheartened. So for us to give like that perspective of not only here's what's going on in inside your bottle, but here's
Right.
all the other bottles going on
That's
for them. Is somewhat helpful in
That's
illuminating.
really interesting. And sorry, I'm already going off script here, but so one kind of theme that's kind of come up on this podcast, talking to publishers and people that work with publishers, is that sometimes, and this comes from a really good space, because a lot of the folks like I work with and that have come on are from maybe newer kind of digital leaning publications, and they come from a journalism background, and kind of the struggle there is the lack of a business, not a business sense, but they don't have experience in it. And so do you find any pushback on people like you kind of mentioned it a bit, any pushback on people giving up a little control like in their organization like that? It's just human nature too. Yeah.
This happens in the SEO area, especially. And one of the things in leading the newsrooms for SEO training is it really is good storytelling. Best SEO practices and hygiene are good storytelling hygiene. And, I one of the exercises I have is like, if I could change one thing about the way journalists work, they'd write the headline before they wrote anything else in their story. It would save them from writing boring stories. It would structure their stories the right way. But the idea of, when you do subheads, use the keywords in the subheads. When you hyperlink, do it this way. When possible, make the story scannable by list. And then you get the pushback. So you're telling me I should just write listicles? Well, no. Look for the opportunities. So what I'm trying to do is I want to go from where they live. And unlike marketing folks who are totally data driven, right? If you see one campaign performs this way, journalists are not going to be 100% data driven. But to use the data to help improve their best practices and their storytelling. And along the way, they're like, oh, if I hyperlink these words instead of these words, or I use this, or I put a summary in front, to reinforce what they're doing rather than to totally redirect, because they do have those suspicions. You're right, Paul. They do have those.
Working with, we work with a variety of sizes of companies, from publicly traded to, there's an owner operator and they might have a salesperson, some 1099s. Working with those more niche kind of smaller pubs, like you're right, Paul. It's their baby. Like they believe in the social mission that they're doing. So even asking when we go through a strategy around fundraising that we bring in an expert around that. And we're like, you can charge more. We did one where we went through 2 years of all of their advertising for their print magazine. And they were talking about being very cautious around rate increases. And we're like, what you're providing here is well below what your market is charging, but they're just, they're not salespeople. So it's really trying to encourage them there. And then that letting go a little bit of some of the controls of like, okay, we're going to be working on your newsletter strategy. We're going to provide recommended text. This is where you need to just make decisions and not be in the weeds involved with everyone. Because these are people that did everything for their publication as they started. They were bootstrapping, and they need to be moved more into that business owner role where they're making decisions. And that does take a little bit of coaching, but that's where our experts and our resumes kind of help give them some trust, and we can show them the numbers, not just so they know what they are, but what they mean to their business. So what does open rate mean to your business now and in the future?
That's great. And I imagine just that kind of the 6-month digital alignment period you talked about is basically it's a big trust building thing also, I'm sure, between the organizations and build that up. So yeah.
What it does, it allows us to provide kind of like a cadence for things. So like when we come in, if there's been multiple consultants, whether that is a professional or hey, my aunt Janet does a really good church newsletter, so she has an eye for design. We always come in of like, okay, everybody can't be at the top of the website. Everybody can't be at the fold. Hey, you launched this newsletter, but are you collecting first-party data? Because we're going to use that in 6 months on an advertising project. So that kind of allows us to identify which priorities are the lightest lift, they'll make the most impact, and then work forward from there. And then it's really kind of more building trust with the owners and the newsrooms or sales and marketing as we go through to say, hey, this is how this all pieces together. We only do 6 months because you hit the middle of the year, strategy changes. And that's where, especially us looking at Q3, Q4, some of it has gone from strategy to service of like, okay, you're just in charge of this now. And you're just make sure the trains are run on time. And then we'll talk about next year, just because they just needed that labor resource because of changes within their organization.
Okay. That's great. And so, you talked about kind of putting everything together. You talked about SEO, you talked about newsletters, talked about a bunch of stuff. What if you had to rank it, and I'm sure every organization is different, but what would you say like the top services that your clients have a need for is? Your most in-demand kind of service offerings, what would you say?
Analytics always seems to be the one that grabs their attention, because anything else that you do, they're going to want to measure it. So whether it's hooking up GA4 and presenting it in a meaningful way for them, doing things like actionable dashboards down to the reporter level, that's one thing that we've helped a lot of the group with. So I would say that's sort of the first one. SEO is there is, people want to say there's a magic wand on that. There's not really. It's not like, oh, we did SEO training and now we've doubled our traffic. Google Discover's going to be a mystery, and you will hit on a story for 1 month and then you won't get that traffic the next month. But like I said, good hygiene on that. But I think newsletters, even if they don't come to us for demand of that, we recognize that, and that's one area where we push back on opportunity for people who maybe aren't in that area or aren't fully taking advantage of that. I just think that's like the highest potential to get the biggest impact, both in as far as audience and revenue. Kyle might have others to add, but I think those are my top three.
We're working with folks around just like value props, like when we talk about newsletters, making donations, or some of them run charitable organizations, especially for our nonprofit newsrooms, is that marketing of themselves, but then, hey, how does that build a relationship with them moving forward? And then with our broadcasters, those things like newsletters and trying to get them out of, you've got the website and you've got OTT and there's this break. So how do we build a relationship with the reader to remind them to download your OTT apps? How can you alert them of unique programming? So that's where you can kind of build out a project instead of, hey, we're relaunching the website. Are we getting more traffic? And that's just kind of those basic things of like, you're redesigning your product, but your marketing's the same. So measuring and kind of maintaining expectations as they go from project to project.
One other thing that we kind of do is a lot of the partners we're working with, they're on great platforms, whether it's Blocks or Social News Desk or Marfeel or GA or, even like MailChimp, but they're not maximizing what they can get out of those, or maybe, the support on all those platforms is good, but sometimes it's like immediate, like we want to do this election page right now. And we can sort of dive in and help them with that because we've worked on I wouldn't say we worked on every platform, but there's a lot we have worked on where we can sort of lend that expertise. I want to start this new newsletter. I want to, like I said, do this election result page, or I want to do this thing. So it's sort of maximizing what they can get out of their existing platforms as well.
They launched a SaaS because they wanted a technology solution, but it was a process solution. It was a people piece. When we talk about social, they're just like, well, Facebook's dead, and they're done with it. And it's like, you hired a social person 10 years ago. That position exists. Hey, there's idle labor resources there. How can we best shift this to an emerging platform, or are our expectations on how social directly impacts our business different from branding to direct traffic? But going back to what Bob said there, like that was a really good example where we had a client, they bought a piece of a software add-on around elections, and they're like, here it is, here's the documentation, and they're like, what do we do?
Yeah, their 2-person digital staff couldn't take 2 days off.
So they gave us a call. They're on one of our agreements, and they're like, we've got this thing, we're behind the ball, we've been trying to figure it out, how fast can you do this? We had an outside expert that knows that piece of software specifically, and then they were able to work with Bob to take it across the finish line to launch a voter's guide and election platform within 4 days. But now we're talking about what is the strategy on election day? What are ways that we can start to collect emails and stuff tied to this elections event? So we're starting to bring in other platforms and strategies instead of just we did the technical implementation.
It's a great kind of showcase of how you can help a publisher on a more holistic level like that. Like they come in for that. Everybody's had that feeling where you sign up for a platform and you're all jacked up about it. You just watch some cool YouTube video about it or something, and you get in. It's like, here you go. And it's just like 17,000 controls and don't know what to do, what does what or anything like that.
Well, it's
what you're doing on podcast, that's a great service to people. The thing about that I was getting across on podcasts is it might not have the audience that they're used to seeing on, my page views. But so many times I've heard people say, like, your news articles tell me what you know, but your podcasts tell me what you're thinking. And I'm like, that's, just another way to enhance the platform and really enhance your brand.
And that's where, like, when we're working with folks and they're like, we want to launch a podcast. It's like, how do you introduce this to staff? Bob and I have both been challenged with ownership wants to do this, or we want to test something in a period where there's less resources this month than last month. And really framing, hey, this is less work than you think it is because we're going to do the one-time setup stuff. There's a lot of one-time things that you don't need to learn, then execute, so we can accelerate that process faster. And then if you're launching a podcast, kind of what is that advertising model? Where can those advertisers' dollar be spent to promote your podcast? So we try to really kind of break it out in a different way, wherever the platform is. And then we work with people like with you on doing that actual execution where, especially in publishing, they're a little more camera shy, they're a little more mic shy, but it's like, you are the expert. So what is the best way to position them in it? And you do a great job with that.
Yeah, I could talk podcasting all day long, but it's such about me. The benefit that you don't get the same amount of impressions as with digital or other things. But one thing I like people to send people home with is, like, when you have a listener, man, they are that's as engaged as a follower or reader or whatever you want to call it as you can get, because they're typically doing other things. They're washing the dishes, they're taking their dog for a walk or whatever. And so just on that end too. And it's funny, when I asked you about the services and you both spoke about, I think you said SEO and then also newsletters. That's been really surprising to me doing this podcast. Besides AI, the only other thing that comes up in every episode I've been doing for the last couple of months is newsletters. I've started my own newsletter, like guilty as charged, in the last 4 or 5 months as well. So it just keeps getting hammered home as well. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, one of my aha moments on newsletters was probably maybe 7 or 8 years ago in University of Missouri Sports, Mizzou. And we had a writer who was great, wall-to-wall coverage. And we would feature his stuff on the website. And then we had like a daily Mizzou newsletter. And a reader called me and said, why there was something that I saw or heard on the website that wasn't in the newsletter. Why didn't it? And it occurred to me that the newsletter was this user's website. That was the only way he consumed our news. And, I think about SEO and newsletters, you're searching your inbox. I saw this thing. I saw this deal. And for many consumers, that is the only way they're getting news. And if I could press a button and tell people website or newsletter, I'd say newsletter. Do the newsletter. That's that's the personal relationship you're going to have with them.
So
That's
working with owners, I mean, it's one of those things like everyone's got a newsletter. We need to launch a newsletter. And it's like, why? Like, what is your business objective? What resources do you have? And how does it align to your business? Because especially around broadcast, they see a very aggressive newsletter campaigns and structure for publishers because they have a conversion funnel. They're going to be asking for money. Well, how does that work for broadcasters? So that's where we got to kind of take it out of the, hey, my peers are doing this, so I'm going to do it. That kind of mimic to like, okay, how does this apply to your business model initially? And then we can start to move forward. And with the newsletters, right now we're working with a journalism school to go into 10 newspaper markets to kind of talk through that. Why a newsletter? And even have that conversation of it is better to produce one or two fewer stories for your site and have a newsletter that has a smaller audience. And it's okay to have a smaller number because they're a more valuable audience. And that's really where going through those analytics, like Bob said, like, what do these numbers mean? Because they've been just chasing big numbers are good. Like we have that scroll depth. We have our open rate is 60% around newsletters. And like, that's bad. They're like, why? I was like, you have a small, dedicated, loyal audience. Like you don't have those people who are more casually interested in you. You can have a greater impact and have your stuff seen by your community, a larger volume, but you're chasing this metric. So that's where it's really kind of breaking down how that applies to their business and their consumer journey.
That's interesting. Yeah. And then for anybody interested in newsletters listening also, I just had Keith Pepper on from Rough Draft Atlanta, and they're crushing it with their newsletter strategy right now. I think he just won some big award for best community newsletter. So anybody interested, go listen to that one also. It's really good. Keith's great. I enjoyed that.
That'll be me. I'll go back and listen. We're always learning here.
yeah, Keith is great. Speaking of that, what is your typical client's organization look like on a scale from a one-person hyper-local newsletter to the New York Times? Or is it all over the map? Like, who are you working with mostly?
Our target is small to medium, privately owned publishers and broadcasters.
Okay.
So, although we've done work with larger publicly traded companies that are in, a majority of the states, or operating nationally in Canada, we really find the best benefit and the best relationship with those companies that want to leverage scales of economy, and they have or acquired multiple weekly newspapers or multiple like daily newspapers. So we're looking at folks that have 30 assets and brands to those that have, one or two. We've been doing a lot of work this last year with nonprofit newspapers or digital only publishers, where they do have like a small, 5-6 person staff, and they're running up against like, oh, we're having our annual campaign. What should we do with our strategy there, and how do we execute it? Or I just need help just validating my sales inventory, or how much time should we spend on Instagram? And that's where we do look at like their staff. What is their capacity right now? Instead of just here's a blanket industry recommendation you would have found online. We kind of, where does it work with them? So the majority of our folks there are within that range for our ongoing fractional services.
And you just mentioned, I didn't have this in the questions, but you just mentioned Instagram. And I just realized I failed to mention anything about social. Do you have any kind of just broad thoughts? Because I have very mixed feelings on social media. I love LinkedIn for my purposes, for my business.
Sure.
But Instagram, it can be like, I'll let you talk on it. I'd love to get your takes on
No,
it.
so we have an expert who's been focused on social media and the evolution of that for publishers and what is it driving traffic or revenue. Obviously, it was written in the New York Times publicly about just the interest of investing into publishers on Facebook. And we've seen staffing changes and organization changes with them as they pivot towards AI resources and others. When we talk to folks about social, it is really what is success, so that there's a common language and expectation across the executive team on what that is and how that's changed from driving traffic to being more brand forward, that we're looking for, are people at the very top funnel engaged with us? Are they aware of us? Making sure we're having that two-way communication. But then when we go into platforms, it is, hey, here's how Instagram works. It is not going to drive traffic to your site here, but here's how it can create other opportunities to opt into your newsletter, branded content. Like it doesn't all have to be on platform. A lot of conversations the past couple of years with using LinkedIn for news, not just business news. And with our conversations we're having with multiple publishers and broadcasters this quarter going into next is around Reddit, simply because when you Google it, it's there.
Mm-hmm.
Reddit is being surfaced to the top. We've also seen that with the shift with Google Discover. Like there's larger platform changes that we need to talk to people about, and what is the expectation for your organization, rather than just, hey, how many times do I post in an hour to get in the news feed? Like that is older, dated strategy. If you hear anything that's more than 6 months old, it's off the books. And, some people are operating that still in that way, that, this is our Facebook strategy we've had for 3 years. And it's like the platform and the consumers are not interacting with you that way. But you have the resources and the tools. So what are ways to best use your time?
Bob, do you have any thoughts on social, or is that not?
No, I was just scrolling through TikTok while Kyle gave that answer. I missed what he said. No, well, just to amplify, though, I think as we promoted the newsletters, the click to capture from Facebook is a good strategy, because they do have very fast sign up tools for getting newsletters and emails, sometimes less clumsy than what you might have on other platforms. So good tool that way. And the other thing is sometimes, as sites have moved away from story commenting on their site, on the individual O&O site, Facebook can serve as a place for community conversation. I think that's still, for regional or local news organizations, it's still important to have that conversation and to listen to that conversation instead of pushing everything one way. So I don't think publishers are fully taking advantage of when there is a good conversation on one of the social sites. And when I say when, because it's not always a good conversation, but when there is something that's a good conversation, of sort of amplifying that conversation, talking about it on your website, driving the traffic back and forth, that's a role that social can still serve.
It's very top funnel. It's a place where people will see you, interact with you. But when we work with folks and we talk about that 6-month plan, is okay, how do we bring them closer to us, that they are signing up for a newsletter or visiting our site, those kind of front door pieces where we have a tighter relationship with them and we can kind of control the cadence of when those conversations happen. And then ultimately, how does that lead to dollars and the quality of those dollars?
Yeah, that's the takeaway I get from a lot of folks. Is it's such a, social media, they've got the attention, they've got the eyeballs, but they're going to try and make you pay for it, is like the big takeaway from it. It's also interesting what you said about Reddit. I've been a Redditor for years, and it's always been kind of this, like, if you know thing, kind of like giant dark underbelly of the internet that, like, the average person on the street, they're like, what is it? And then, like, I'm like, oh, I spend half of my time browsing through these communities on there. So
yeah, we've sometimes showed, like, here are your top refers the last month, and like Discover, Google, Facebook, Newsbreak, Reddit, and publishers will say, well, let's go get some of that Reddit traffic. What can we, like, yeah, you just really can't go in there and
man, they'll let you
buy
know
your way through it.
Yeah, if you try and go on Reddit, they'll let you know what they Think about
Yeah.
that. That's the problem.
Paul, I'd be interested, just asking you, like, how do you use Reddit? Is there a strategy, or is it more just conversation?
Oh, I don't have a strategy for my business or anything. I've just been a casual personal user for years. It's like the best source because I have such a curated list of communities I follow in there. It's like the best source for me to just, it's not Instagram where I get on a reel and I'm just stuck in, funny toddler videos for an hour and a half. It's like interesting things with interesting feedback. You can ask questions to, DIY plumbing or whatever, like very specific things, ask a mechanic. So it's just such a useful tool.
Yeah.
That it's just like this conundrum. I don't know how to crack it from a like business standpoint or driving people, but
And that's the strategy piece around that of like, there's all these different communities. What is going to get you a large audience because you're participating in something like a national park topic or, those really kind of hyper local ones where maybe people already have an opinion about your organization. So really kind of going through and navigating that a bit. And I had a conversation this was a couple of years ago, with the Reddit voice for the Washington Post. And it was like, I'm representing the brand, but I'm representing this new way. And you can see how their social strategy has evolved, especially around Instagram and Shorts and a few others, to provide the news, but in a style and in a way that reaches that, target audience. And it isn't always that click to the site or that immediate subscribe.
Yeah. Great takeaways there. I love it. Yeah. That's like I said, that's my overall feelings on social media. It's a mixed bag. Same way I feel about AI kind of. And I'm going to not bring up AI in this conversation because it comes up in every one because we got enough other stuff to talk about. So we kind of touched on that. We touched on that. Could you guys, either or both of you, touch on the program you mentioned, Kyle, that you're working on with the Reynolds Journalism Institute?
Sure.
Just to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, we've got a ongoing multi-year partnership with them to help build out programs for it's a program called Potters where they go and have students in 10 different markets. So we build out a program for them based on a topic that's selected every year. This year, we're going to be digging into newsletters. I can only say so much about that. But Bob can talk to more about kind of the process of building out the program and the launch of the program.
Right. So the Potter ambassadors, they're graduate students, and so they're really smart. The learning kind of goes both ways on that a little bit. But like last year, we did it with I think it was 10 papers on SEO practice, and we provided some training on that, but we also provided technical assistance on setting up Search Console and making sure were the sites optimized. And then the ambassadors were able to go and they spend a week in these small newsrooms across the Midwest, and they implement that. So we're really a little bit of a training and a lot of support for those ambassadors so that they can focus on boots on the ground, one-to-one training, and the technical support can come from us.
It's the teach the teacher situation. And what's great about, developing these out, there's only so many slots available. But as we're building out these programs with partners, whether they're a larger national trade organization or this journalism institute, like they could work directly with us to launch that same program with them directly. And Bob's been very instrumental with that with a few different of our clients.
That's great. And then when we hopped on the call, I think one of you mentioned the local media association and Bloom Labs. What was that? I wasn't quite aware of that one. What was that you were talking about?
Oh, sure. So we're a partner with the Local Media Consortium, Local Media Association, Newspapers of America, just, helping them in their membership base with different strategies and different products. So including Local Media Consortium's DAWS program, Digital On Demand, very much just like a fractional as you need it resource. So right now we're working with Local Media Association's Bloom Labs, which is one of their cohorts. And what they're doing is they're launching WordPress sites on Newspack. So we're launching 3 of their websites. One's already launched, Flint Beat, where we brought in a fractional designer. So our website designer has been working on media pages for over 15 years. So it's not just, here's a web designer. Here's someone who knows our audience, our content, which is very key when you're redesigning a website, digital development resources to implement it. And then, there's just some tricky things around Newspack versus an open WordPress, or if you're using blocks or arcs or some of these other ones that we have agreements with. So when we walk them through the process of launching the website, it is expectations. You're not going to get a bunch of new traffic. What are your business objectives? You really want to drive video? Everyone was telling us they wanted to drive video. And Bob would go through the audit and say, you're producing a video a week. Like, this can't be featured on the top of your site. Like, we have to find alternate presentations. And one of my favorite exercises of a website redesign is going through the navigation, not as a way to have them build out everything, but to have that conversation of what's important to prioritize.
You like to be the parent who tells them what they can't have.
Yeah, it's a good inventory of like, nobody's clicking this stuff. Less than 5% of your audience is be clicking your navigation at all, but it allowed them kind of organize what are they doing, what's important, what's on autopilot. They might have a reporting resource doing something that's not driving traffic, and it's like, okay, we're making a significant change that is very more internal than it is external. So, hey, where do we need to better align our resources and the product that we're building out for folks? So we've been able to do that with the local media association, which is fantastic.
Excellent. Also, anybody listening, the Local Media Consortium, if you're interested in that, I just had Fran Wills, the CEO from there, on a few weeks ago, and that's a very cool organization as well. So,
we're tied with them. They have a program called DODS. I know it's one of their big pieces every year. So it's digital on demand, and we're a partner of that. So if you are part of the LMC, if you're going in asking for a specific individual project, you're able to reach out to that team there with Chris and Fran, and they'll find a partner like us to work with you.
And I also wanted to touch on the stuff you said about video, how everybody wants to do video. That's another theme on this show. It's so sexy, and you just keep hearing how like video, but it's so hard to do consistently and at a high quality. It's that's kind of one takeaway I've come away with. It's
we're finding though, with one of our sites especially, that they had a partnership with TV stations, and they were producing these finished talking head interview videos and putting them on YouTube, and then they would have their reporters do YouTube shorts talking right into the camera about the story and insight. And the YouTube shorts are doing way better than those produced pieces that just have the honesty. So yeah, I know it's tricky. It's a different way to get in, getting indexed on YouTube's a lot harder, but I think lowering the expectation for what the production value has to be and just getting the journalists talking candidly, not everyone can do that, but I think we kind of want to eliminate some of the barriers to entry on that for people.
That's a good point. I think that's the way a lot of things are going too. Just the candid, just holding your phone up. Have you sidebar? Have you heard of the millennial pause? Have you heard of that term? It's so I'm a millennial
on TikTok.
Yes. Yeah, I'm a millennial, and this is coming from the Gen Z and Gen Alpha, and it's basically like when they come on like a TikTok, he says, "Hey guys, how's it going?" They're just talking, but then you have a millennial or older, and it's just like the video comes on. Hey everybody, how's it? There's like that pause when they start recording. It's just something funny I've seen popping up on there that just little things like that to learn from if you are looking into that kind of stuff.
And that's worth like working with our broadcasters on managing that production of still having that brand, that quality, not being able to be immediately replicated. But they do have like the talents, and then just like simple editing practices of here's an establisher, like taking out that pause.
Right.
That are subtle, that might not be noticed by the reader. The other thing I really like digging into video is just like what's your total labor hours versus how many hours of production you have. So whether you are a digital only play, a newspaper play, or a broadcaster with multiple stations, is when you're producing a piece of content for, let's say OTT. how can that be cut up, repurposed? What value does it have at different stages? So when you put in you're building a 30-minute program, how can that drive 3 hours of content? Because we're going to splice it, we're going to mix it, we're going to do different pieces with it. Bob and I have done that a lot with print. So now we're kind of bringing that to digital broadcasters on, hey, this is how much value it has now. We're going to keep it unique to OTT or to your website, but here's how to tease it. And then here's the life cycle of that video over 6 months, 9 months, where it's in different chunks and pieces, and usually try to sell them through, hey, look how much traffic this 20-year-old Kitchen Nightmares has, and see how like just that Ramsey production company has gone through and cut them up, repurposed them, put them in 5-minute chunks, 30-minute chunks, especially with short form videos being buried on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, just where does it hit that monetization minute, So that's a kind of a fun piece to go into of using analytics different. The labor piece, the production piece of that. It's not just, hey, how many views did it get?
That's how you should be looking at it from that, the business owner kind of standpoint I was kind of alluding to before. Okay, yeah, this has been great. We're coming up on time, and I think I touched on everything that I had written down. Is there anything I missed that you'd like to talk about that AlignSimple's doing, or anything else you'd like to promote or point people to? Anything along those lines?
I'll start and then I'll go over to Bob. Right now, we're having a lot of conversations with folks as they're planning FY25, both in what are their projects, what are their labor resources that they're looking for. So right now, it is that time to kind of align what are you going to be doing next year? What are the deficits you're looking for? And whether it's AI, we can accelerate that by saying, you're all in a buy stage. You are using AI. You already have the platforms, but your staff hasn't turned them on or they haven't been coached into it. So we might prioritize that piece or kind of looking at an overall revenue plan. So really that's where we're at right now with a lot of folks where they are in their business cycle.
Yeah, and I would just offer encouragement for local media organizations. We kind of have everything going for us except momentum. We have an interested audience. We have new tools for reaching people. We can operate in quicker ways. So just start walking with that swagger again. Figure out what you're doing better than everybody else, and don't be afraid to promote it and serve your community.
That's awesome, Bob. I couldn't have said that better myself. Well, great, guys. Kind of like I said at the top, you two clearly have a lot of experience in this space, and I feel like I could keep talking to you for a while. We might have to do this again sometime because I feel like we're just scratching the surface here. But yes, and I will link to you guys and AlignSimple in the show notes. And thank you for coming on. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you for listening to Small Press Big Ideas. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to help the show, the best thing you can do is to tell a friend or colleague and just take a few minutes to leave a rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening to right now. It only takes a minute out of your day, but it really does help the podcast grow and reach more ears. Check back for new episodes every Monday.